Hi, how's it going? I'm Mike from Australia, and this is the English Breakthrough for Germans podcast. This podcast will give you, German speaker, comfortable listening practice with some anecdotes from my own life and teaching, as well as some interviews and different things like that to help you understand better how successful language learning works, so you can forget learning apps and take control of the learning process yourself. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back. And if this is your first time, welcome. As an adult learner of German, I reached C2, and now I've been teaching languages as well for 13 years, both English and German. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to talk about some thoughts that I've had personally following the interview that I had with Miles last week. You don't need to have listened to that episode. But yeah, I'm going to share with you some of the reflections that I've had. It was quite interesting to do it, and it was definitely the first time that I've done such an interview like that on this podcast. And I got some nice feedback from the listeners about it, so I thought I would share my thoughts, my 2 cents about the podcast. If you didn't listen to it, so Miles is a good friend of mine from England originally, and we met in Sydney. We moved to Berlin around the same time in 2011. I learned German relatively quickly, I guess, and he took a long time. And he only managed to get to C1 after over 12 years in Germany. It wasn't easy for him to learn German, and we talked about the reasons why this was in that episode. So yeah, you could go back and listen if you like, but not necessary for this one. Yeah, and of course, that might be a good episode for you to listen to for some extra listening practice, because you've got me, an Australian, chatting to somebody from England. All right. This episode, sorry, oh my God, I'm a bit all over the place today. This week has been a bit difficult for me because I've been recovering from a minor operation last week. I won't go into too much detail, but I will share that I had a small procedure on my nose, not for beauty reasons. So it wasn't a so-called nose job, which is a nose operation just for cosmetic reasons. But I'll tell you how it came about. I have had periods where I haven't been able to sleep super well over the last couple of years. I've noticed sometimes at night that I haven't been able to breathe super well, and I might wake myself up in the middle of the night, and that's a little bit unpleasant. And of course it means that I don't get enough sleep. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's worse. But last year in April, I went to see an ENT doctor, or an ears, nose, and throat doctor. And she told me that I need to use a spray which will help me breathe better. It was okay for a little bit, but it got worse again this year. So I went back to a doctor, but it was a different ENT doctor. And then this doctor told me that there's a small procedure that I can have done, which will free up my airways. So I was very happy to be told this, because it meant that that it was something relatively minor that would be able to be fixed, and that if it was the real reason for the problem, I would be able to start sleeping better as well, and it would increase my overall well-being. So that procedure was on Tuesday last week, just after the podcast recording with Miles, actually, and then I spent most of the weekend in my apartment in Berlin, and the temperatures was about 38 degrees on the weekend in Berlin. It was hot everywhere, I'm sure, wherever you are. And I'm sure it was hot over the weekend as well. And inside my apartment, it was about 30 degrees. So really difficult for me to manage this warmth. And I had such little energy after the operation, so I couldn't do anything. Really, I didn't have any social plans. I didn't play squash. Normally I play squash on the weekend, but I wasn't able to do that. I had this swelling in my nose, so it felt like I was quite sick, and as I said, my energy was really, really low. But I did get time to practice a lot of guitar, so that was of course very, very satisfying. And guitar is something that I recently came back to doing a lot more of, which I did in my youth when I was a teenager. So it's really, really satisfying to kind of come back to something that was always a passion of mine, which I had neglected for so many years. And also, if you're listening in Berlin, I have a concert tip for you coming on this Friday. So on the next Friday, the 3rd of July, I'm playing with my old big band Chameleon, a band I used to play trumpet in for years. So that's right, trumpet. I played trumpet for years, but now it's guitar, which is my focus. and the concert's in the Luftschloss at the Tempelhofer Feld in Berlin. It's a temporary structure made out of wood, which is built just for the summer, and I think it's been around for the last 2 summers or 3 summers, and they hold concerts there. It's kind of like a Shakespeare theatre. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to the concert, so come along and say hello if you have time. Okay, so let's get to my thoughts about the podcast from last week. Thanks again to everybody who listened to that episode of the podcast. It was a really fascinating chat that I had with Miles, and here are a few takeaways that I was able to gain from it, or insights you could call them, from the podcast. We sort of talked about it a little bit, but I might go into a little bit more detail here. Okay, so number 1, intelligence and ability does not mean progress will be automatic. So how fast you learn a language does not depend on how intelligent you are. Miles is able to learn a foreign language. He proved that. Yeah, we have the evidence for that. He's an intelligent guy. He's very socially aware, even though he's a little bit stubborn at times, and I don't think he would mind me saying that. But yeah, so he proved that by achieving C1 in the end, it was possible for him. So there was no natural issue with him learning a language, but it did take him a long time to do. It took him 12 years after moving to Berlin before he was able to reach C1. His German didn't make any progress for a long time. And I know this because we met regularly during that time that he was living in Berlin as well, and I could see how his progress was going, and it was really quite slow. And it was only really when he started to apply himself more and put in the effort that he was able to make more progress. So what can we say about this? As I said, intelligence doesn't necessarily mean that you will learn the language automatically. It also doesn't happen just by moving to the country. So many people say, oh, you have to move to the country to be able to learn the language. But Miles demonstrated that that's not the case. So you still need to do extra things. You still need to work consciously on developing your language skills and practicing writing, practicing reading at home. All right, so that's the end of point number 1. The next point is point number 2, of course, and this is about graded readers, or these are these books which are especially written, and they have the controlled vocabulary for learners and controlled grammar for the different levels of language learning. So they start at level 1 and go up to level 6 or level 7. Yeah, and I've talked about these on previous episodes if you're interested. Miles said that he had a book, or he read a book, which was a graded reader. So yeah, I suggested this book to him, and then he went and bought it, and it really, really helped him, he said. And these kinds of books you can get from publishers like Penguin or Cambridge. I'll tell you a little bit more about how to find them at the end of this section. I know personally that these books are really, really useful. But there was still something that he said that I hadn't really considered before. He said that the graded reader helped him to understand more clearly what exactly standard German was, or base German. I think he said standard German. And when he heard other things like slang or variations on the language, then he was easily able to recognize, okay, that's not standard German. That's why I can't understand it. Which gave him more confidence, it sounded like. So to give you an example of what I mean, I'll give you a German example here. So take a word like schauen, yeah? As in the sentence like, ich habe dann mal den Film geschaut. Okay? Now, I live in Berlin. Sometimes I see things like, kiek mal rein, yeah? So that's like an advertisement outside a shop or something like that. And kiek mal rein is not standard German. That's kind of specific Berlin dialect. So somebody who's learning German might see schauen and might see kieken and think that they're the same kind of verb, right? They both mean to look. So which one should you learn? But if you read readers, you will see that schauen is a lot more frequent, a lot more common and standard than kieken. So that's what I mean. So Miles said he was able to get a better intuition, a better gut feeling about which vocabulary and which grammar was more standard because he had read a lot of or read a book. I don't know how many books he read, but he said he noticed that he felt more confident after reading this book because it gave him a feeling for what's standard and what's not. Okay. Right. Now, listeners of this podcast, if you're interested in reading books, listeners of this podcast should consider something around level 4, I would say. So start with a level 4 graded reader from Penguin or Cambridge and see how that feels for you. You might be ready for a level 5 book, but that's okay. You can read a level 4 book first and get a feeling for that. So you could search on Google for Penguin graded reader level 4 or Cambridge graded reader level 4. Yeah, either of those publishers are personal recommendations of mine, Penguin and Cambridge. Remember, it should be relatively easy for you to read with only about 2 to 3 unknown words per page maximum. And that way you can read faster. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next point. So this is the next thing that I have learned, or that I learned last week from talking to Miles. Miles said, he gave this advice for Germans using English. Do you remember it? He said, just go for it. He said, don't worry about grammar and vocabulary. Just get in the conversation. Try and listen to the other person and just be a part of the conversation. And don't be shy. Just go for it. Now, you might remember, if you've listened to a few episodes of the podcast, I talked about this advice, just speak. I think it was in the very, very first episode, maybe. When I talked about why I'm starting the podcast. So the advice, just speak, is not always very helpful. But Miles did say, just go for it. So this kind of sounds a little bit contradictory. So let's talk about this point a little bit more. When you're in a situation and you need to speak English, you're having a conversation with someone, or you're speaking on the phone to a business partner, to a colleague, in that moment, you just have to concentrate on communication. You just need to do your best. You need to just go for it, exactly as Miles said. You need to try to connect with that person and don't focus on language too much. Now, again and again, I know this feeling both personally and from my lessons, okay? There's something that people might do if they're feeling like they can't find a word or something. You know, so that it's difficult to just relax and be in the moment in the conversation if you know that there's a word that you can't find in that moment. So some people might try to stop the conversation if they can't think of a word. So they're like, wait. What's that word? Wie sagt man? Nochmal auf English. You know, if there's a word that's not coming to mind. But then there might be like this kind of awkward silence. So like, hey, so what did you do on Monday in that meeting? Well, we talked about, wait. Oh, what's that word? You know? And then there's this awkward silence. And then if the word does come to mind, but too late, so maybe like 30 seconds later, sometimes learners go, oh, the word was consumption, energy consumption. And then everybody else in the conversation's like, yeah, we moved on from that, you know? And so this person is now thinking about language in the moment of the conversation. And if you're thinking about language in the moment of the conversation, you're thinking less about what you actually want to say. So it's kind of something we need to step back from a little bit. But yeah, there's a reason that's not so easy. I'll talk about that now. So when you're having a conversation, I would recommend that you just forget it. If you can't think of a word, just let go. Yeah? Because 9 times out of 10, the other person hasn't even noticed that you haven't found a word. You know there's a word. It's on the tip of your tongue. But yeah, it's not coming to mind. It's normal, just remember, even in your first language, that you might forget a word. We do this all the time. But in our first language, we have the linguistic skills to be able to deal with it. So we might have other linguistic strategies that we can use to manage the situation. Yeah, so you might use other words to describe it, or you might start your sentence again, or you might use vague language. So you might say, the topic of the meeting was ooh, something, I can't remember. We talked about something in the meeting, yeah, and then you don't have to say the actual thing. And that's completely fine. That's what we do in our first language. When I was learning German, I was really happy to discover the piece of vocabulary mäßig, right? Because then you could say like, oh, wir haben irgendwas Rockmäßiges gespielt. Or you could say like, oh, what kind of movie did you watch? And the person might say, wir haben so irgendwas Comedy-mäßiges gespielt, gesehen. So yeah, this mäßig was really, really useful for me because it's like a piece of vague language that I can use again and again and again when I don't know exactly how to describe something in detail. So that's an example of a strategy that you might use if you can't think of the word. And native speakers have lots of these strategies. In English, we say things like kind of, yeah, it's a kind of green piece of clothing, or I have a couch in my living room and it's a kind of gray. And that's a way that you can be vague. Okay, so this advice, just speak, is great advice for the moment, but the advice doesn't tell you what you need to do outside just speaking. Okay, and that's that you need to keep your English fresh by doing other things at home as well. So things like reading and listening, but make sure that that's within your level. So if you've got a colleague, or let's say you have on Monday morning, you have a meeting at work and you know that everybody speaks English in that meeting, then you need to read a book on Sunday evening. You need to warm up your brain for English for that meeting on Monday morning. And that's going to really, really help you. Okay, so just speak is really, really important in the moment, but you also need to warm up your brain with some appropriate, comfortable reading the night before. And remember, when we talk about reading, I'm not talking about news articles. I'm not talking about Time magazine or the newspaper. Yeah, I'm talking about novels. Novels where different characters are interacting. So you get examples of natural speech, not news articles. So make sure if you're reading novels. That's really, really important because then the vocabulary is more like spoken vocabulary. Okay, point number 4. This is another takeaway that I had after this conversation with Miles. When we talked about pronunciation in the podcast episode last week, Miles said that I gave him a tip on how to pronounce the German word Bruder. So I said that for an English speaker to pronounce the word Bruder, it's really important to drop your jaw so it doesn't sound like Brüder, because that sounds like the plural one. But you need to make sure that the jaw is dropped. And so this is an awareness that a lot of English speakers don't have. It's something that English speakers don't need to do in English. So it's a bit unusual and you need to get used to it. Yeah, so you might remember he was very happy to tell this story. He said for him it was quite a liberating experience because it was something that he was unable to do for a long time, and it felt quite empowering and satisfying for him. And he even said that he proudly showed another English-speaking friend of his who was unable to pronounce the word Bruder how to pronounce the word Bruder. And this made him feel really, really good. So this was a positive experience for him, but it came very, very late in his language learning journey. So I know that you need to focus on pronunciation early. And Miles said that he was a bit frustrated that he didn't do that. So remember this about the brain. Every time you repeat an action, you're giving feedback to your brain that that action is valid and correct. Okay, so I know this because I personally have a terrible habit of pulling my mobile phone out of my pocket in the lift coming up to my apartment. And then I open something new on my phone, which I didn't intend to. So what am I doing? I'm signaling to my brain that the lift and the mobile phone are connected. So every time I get into the lift, I will think of my mobile phone. And so this habit is going to be reinforced, and the brain will learn to connect those two things. And that's the same thing with pronunciation, okay? So you need to focus on pronunciation early so that when you see words on a page, you know how to pronounce them, and you can confidently activate the sound of the language on the page in your mind. So if you haven't focused on pronunciation, you'll just activate your German pronunciation. Or in the case of Miles, he'll just activate his English pronunciation. So he would say Brüder instead of Bruder. A lot of English speakers really struggle to pronounce the word Becher, so they might say Bäcker. Instead of saying Nachtclub, they might say Nachtclub because they really struggle with this CH sound. Yeah, or Ich mache or something like that. And you might understand them a lot, but you might understand them okay in most circumstances. But it's better to learn it correctly from the beginning. So every time you see that word, you hear that word, you're reinforcing something which is correct instead of practicing something which is incorrect. So if there are words in English which you struggle to pronounce, my advice would be try to find the correct pronunciation and then practice it so it's no longer a problem, rather than ignoring it and or maybe practicing the wrong pronunciation or a German accented pronunciation. So some German words which are often mispronounced, and a lot of German speakers mispronounce these and have been mispronouncing them for a very, very long time. They would say interaction instead of interaction. Or they say forever instead of forever. They say back instead of bag. Where or were instead of were. So in a sentence like, where were you? They might say, where were you? And then they're practicing this were sound, which is a German sound. But the correct pronunciation is were. I'll just repeat those words quickly for you. Interaction. Forever. Bag. Were. And I would like to talk about pronunciation a little bit more on another episode, but not now. These pronunciations, the incorrect ones, they follow German pronunciation rules. If you would like to develop your pronunciation, make sure you do some immersive reading. Immersive reading is when you're reading and listening at the same time. To one of those books, for example. So find one of those books that has audio so you can listen along at the same time. Okay, number 5, here we go. So this is something that I've learned as well from the conversation with Miles. Number 5, language proficiency gives us confidence. Lacking language skills affects our motivation and can lead to avoidance. Okay, so language can give us the power to feel more capable at work, to be able to lead our team better. It can help us to form better relationships, and it can help us focus on what is really, really important, which is the work that we do, our job. We can focus on our job instead of worrying about language all the time. Okay, so we want to be able to remove this language barrier, and working on language can increase that confidence. Just yesterday, I was looking through some surveys, which I did. So a couple of weeks ago, you might remember, I did a Volkshochschule course for 1 week. And at the start, I got the students to fill out some questions telling me what they thought their problems were and difficulties were in English. And a lot of them told me that they avoid situations because they know they would have to speak English. So for these people, avoidance is one of the consequences of not feeling confident about English. Okay, so Miles reminded us that when we put in effort over a few months and we really try to work on our English, we can grow quickly, and then suddenly language becomes less of an issue. But I get it. When we have to work on our language skills, it does sometimes look like a huge mountain standing in front of us, which we have to climb. And it seems like it would take so long to get to the top and make strong progress in the language. So we might spend a few months... But when we then spend a few months putting in the effort and we really, really try, we do eventually get to the top. And eventually, I mean, letztendlich, yeah, not eventuell. So we will eventually get to the top of the mountain, and we don't have to worry about language anymore at that point. And hopefully we will have learned some strategies along the way, which we can use again and again to help us in future if we feel like we are struggling again with the language, such as emergent reading that I talked about before. So where we're listening and reading at the same time. Okay, number 6. Language courses are not enough. You also need a lot of understandable language input from other places like books, okay? So Miles talked a lot about 2 language courses which he did, which really helped him a lot because he really focused his time and energy on this. He did his homework dutifully on the train to and from the classes. He talked about reading a little bit, so he touched on reading a little bit, but I would say that language courses generally are not going to be enough for you to help you reach fluency in the language for a number of reasons. So first one, you're not exposed to enough variety of input. Your other students are also non-native speakers in language classes, so you're not likely to use natural expressions. So things in English which are natural are things like to put something off. We had to put the meeting off because a number of people were sick. Or used to. We used to work more with our partners in Hamburg, but we don't anymore since the companies merged. I'm really into. So this means I really like something, like I'm really into funk music right now. So this kind of language input doesn't come out in classes when you have lots of different international speakers. You need to get it from reading books at your level. Also, to be fluent in a language, you need to hear language used by people of other demographics, not just people your age. So you want also old people, young people, teenagers, men talking to male friends, women talking to female friends, a teacher talking to a parent about a child's performance at school, or maybe even a couple breaking up. So these kinds of conversations are not normally part of a language course, and it's very difficult for teachers to bring them into the classroom. So you can get those through reading though. Okay, I'm going to finish up now. I actually have to start teaching in 1 minute, so I'm going to rush this bit. If you enjoyed the episode, please recommend the podcast to a friend. You can send me an email or a message to let me know if you liked it. It really means a lot to me to get some feedback from my listeners. And I cannot believe it's already been 10 episodes. The time has really, really flown past quickly. But it's been really, really fun so far, and I look forward to growing the podcast more. Okay, now I'm going to relax after this lesson for the rest of the day and get excited about a concert tonight because I'm seeing one of my favorite funk musicians, one of my favorite guitar players. His name is Corey Wong, and he's playing tonight in Berlin. All right, take care, everyone. See you later. Bye-bye.